Hi everyone, my name is Iskuhi Kantarian, and today me and my group are going to review Chapter 18, a research focus on corrections from Textbook 1. The main topic of Chapter 18 includes a historical overview of punishment and corrections, a close analysis of the system from antiquity to the 18th century, punishment in the New World, corrections today, the types of incarceration, the size and cost of the correctional enterprises, the problem of overcrowding in prisons, women in prisons, and privatization of corrections. The final and third main topic is going to evaluate the importance of community alternatives. It is common to associate corrections with prison system. That equation is not accurate today, nor was it ever accurate in the past. Thousands of years ago, the Romans did not use prisons for punishment even after they settled and built the city and state of Rome. Roman criminals were punished primarily by being sentenced to hard labor for a specific period of time or for life. The Romans also had capital punishment of various forms of serious crimes that affected not only the Roman state but also the gods. Prisons were simply places for definition of offenders awaiting trials or criminals about to be transported to the places where their sentences was to be carried out. The late Middle Ages in Europe were marked by the emergence of strong rules and rulers who gained increasing control over the punishment of wrongdoers. Ultimately, imprisonment came to be the primary punishment and forced labor the secondary punishment. It was not in New England, however, but in Pennsylvania that the American correctional movement began. William Penn started the Great Law of December 4, 1682, which provided for the establishment of houses of correction. In Pennsylvania, physician William Rush took up the cause of penal reform. A small penitentiary wing was added to the Walnut Street Jail in 1790. A few years after the creation of the Walnut Street Wing, the crime rate appeared to drop. Later, other states adapted this concept and reduced the use of capital punishment. Some of the states are New York in 1791, Virginia and Kentucky in 1800s, New Jersey in 1798. The Pennsylvania system brought new solutions, which included better prisons with better conditions and better management. This new system provided small prison cells, only 1 hour exercise daily, and no communication between prisoners, which led to anxiety increase in prisons.
Hi, my name is Melissa Stoudemire, and this is Textbook 1, Chapter 18. The Auburn System, Congregate Labor. Congregate labor was an alternate approach to the prison system that was developed in New York. This new system allowed prisoners to work and eat in groups. Congregate labor was cost beneficial. The Reformatory Movement. Ideas of reform were born from frustration with the current system of high costs, brutality, corruption, and lack of hope. Prison reformatories were born with the values of morality, good treatment, and regeneration. The National Prison Association was founded during this time of new reform. The medical treatment model. After World War I, psychologists became involved with the treatment of criminals in the penitentiary system. Individual and group therapy were put into practice. Despite the medical model, treatment of inmates remained harsh and militaristic. Programs such as shock therapy and revulsion therapy raised civil liberty concerns. And due to a lack of staffing and a lack of funding, the program received disappointing results. Community involvement. With a lack of rehabilitation of offenders in prisons, community leaders helped integrate them into communities. Probation, parole, and halfway houses became more prominent. And later, community projects and work release programs became popular. The prisoners' rights movement. Prisoners at Attica State Prison revolted in September of 1979 due to being denied their fundamental rights. Minimum standards of humane treatment weren't being met, such as hygiene, religious freedom, and medical care. Until the middle of the 20th century, felony imprisonment meant loss of all civil rights. With the overturning of the hands-off doctrine, prisoners had the right to humane living conditions, legal assistance, and religious freedom. Hi, my name is Melissa Stoudemire. Textbook 1, Chapter 18. Summary of Nigeria's Prison System Fails Its People. The Nigerian prison system has failed its people in many ways. Overcrowding, mistreatment of prisoners, and lack of basic amenities such as clean running water, adequate nutrition all contribute to the egregious conditions many inmates suffer. The lack of these basic necessities has a terrible outcome on the health and well-being of the prisoners, culminating in preventable diseases being prevalent within the Nigerian prison system. In addition, there is a serious human rights violation within the prison system, such as prisoners being held without trial for extended periods of time, and many prisoners being locked up without having committed a crime. Mentally ill patients are often brought and held in prison without psychiatric evaluation, and in most cases stay in the prison system simply because their families can no longer take care of them. There's also issues of corruption that exist within the system, which prevents inmates who do not have the resources or adequate means to seek proper legal representation. Underfunding and lack of proper staffing are key elements in why the Nigerian prison system has failed its people.
Hi, I'm Marisol. My chapter was chapter 18, Research on Corrections. The part I had to do was types of incarceration and prison gangs. There are two categories of prison facilities, one being detention facilities and the other one being correctional facilities. Detention facilities, they house persons arrested and undergoing processing, awaiting trial, or awaiting a transfer. Correctional facilities include county jails and state and federal prisons. Jails are operated by counties and cities. Jails are not sanctuary, have fewer service programs for inmates, and do not separate dangerous from non-dangerous prisoners. Overcrowded and underfunded. There are 3,304 jails in the U.S. Prisons have better management than jails and better education, recreation, and employment programs. Prisons are larger and have more inmates and have bigger budgets. Prisons have three distinct custody levels for inmates: 1. Maximum security prisons, 2. Medium security prisons, and 3. Medium security prisons. Most of the prisoners are male. State and federal correction facilities holds only 1,500,000 female prisoners by 2008, as compared with 1,427,000 male prisoners. Since 1981, the number of women incarcerated has risen from 4.2 to 8% of the total prison population. The number of white persons in state and federal prisons in 2007 was 521,900, while the number of black persons in prison was 586,200. In 2007, 8.5% of the black male population ages between 25 to 29 were in prison. First, inmates are deprived of their liberty and cut off from friends and family. The results are lost emotional relationships, boredom, loneliness. Second, inmates are deprived of goods and services. While it's true that an inmate will only get 3 squares and clean sheets, the standard of living inside a prison is very low. Third, inmates are deprived of heterosexual relations. Criminologists have identified a number of psychological problems that result from this deprivation. The worst of these problems express itself in the homosexual enslavement of younger prisoners by older aggressive inmates.
Hello, my name is Devon Williams, and I am from Professor Victor Shaw's Sociology class 355, and I'll be doing Textbook 1, Chapter 18, Correctional Officers, Privatizing of Corrections. So first I'll start off with controlling inmates. Correctional officers survive by earning respect and resorting when necessary to unarmed coercion. James W. Marquardt designed an innovative study to address the issues of coercion. Marquardt became a correctional officer for 19 months in prison, housing nearly 300 inmates. He worked throughout the institution collecting data on social control and orders. Marquardt developed relations with more than 20 key informants who helped him interpret events. It also demonstrated that force served not only as a control mechanism but also indulged group cohesion, maintained status and difference, and facilitated promotions. In the end, with the removal of most makeshift weapons, the rate of violent assaults had been dramatically reduced by 90% in 5 years. And there are 5 types of correctional officers: Polymas, burnouts, functionaries, hardasses, and white hats. And then I have another section that focuses on programs in penal institutions. So there's contemporary programs in American corrections, which are labor, treatment, and rehabilitation. So first I'll focus on labor, and the labor bullet point demand to save taxpayers money led to massive programs to employ prisoners for profit. Prison labor came in gradually in the early 1930s when federal legislation prohibited the interstate sale of prison-made goods. Then I have 2 more bullet points. In the 1970s, prison administrators once again realized the potential profitability of prison industries. California used provision labor to help out in various emergency situations, such as forest fires, emergencies, and toxic spills. Then I have treatment and rehabilitation. Offenders are claimed to be in need of rehabilitation. They may be psychologically disturbed, addicted to alcohol or drugs, or simply lacking the basic skills necessary to survive a complex society. Criminologists have faith in rehabilitation programs or any physiological opposed to the emphasis of treating and correcting behavior. There are 3 types of programs in the United States that focus on behavior, educational, and vocational therapy. And then I have another bullet point that says medical therapy, medical problems, AIDS, TB, and mental illness. Since 1991, AIDS have been the second most common cause of death among state prisoners. Correctional officers often are afraid of dealing with HIV-infected inmates. The cost of caring for a terminal AIDS patient has been estimated to be about $500,000 US dollars. Inmates with physical illness, correctional administrators are faced with a large number of mentally ill offenders. Then my next bullet point will be the elderly inmates in prison. The offenders are claimed to be in need of rehabilitation. They may be psychologically disturbed, addicted to alcohol or drugs, or simply lacking the basic skills necessary to survive a complex society. Criminologists have faith in rehabilitation programs or any physiological opposed to the emphasis of treating and correcting behavior. There are three types of programs in the United States that focus on behavior, educational, and vocational therapy. And then I have another bullet point that says medical therapy, medical problems, AIDS, TB, and mental illness. Since 1991, AIDS have been the second most common cause of death among state prisoners. Correctional officers often are afraid of dealing with HIV-infected inmates. The cost of caring for a terminal AIDS patient has been estimated to be about $500,000 US dollars. Inmates with physical illness, correctional administrators are faced with a large number of mentally ill offenders. Then my next bullet point will be the elderly inmates in prison. There are 1,240 inmates over the age of 55, and the elderly prison population is expected to increase dramatically in the incoming decades. Offenders often experience family conflict, depression, suicidal thoughts, and the fear of dying while incarcerated. The growth poses many challenges to prison administrators. People who have been incarcerated for their entire adult lives often find that they have lost their ability to make decisions for themselves. And there's a theorist, Edith Flynn. She strongly recommends special housing and programs for three reasons: to meet increased numbers with the prisoners, to avoid litigation, and the third reason is to protect the health and safety of a vulnerable group, since them being elderly. Then my next bullet point is women in prison. Until the mid-19th century, there were no separate prisons for women in the United States. The first prison for women was opened in 1835 at Mount Pleasant, New York, next to and under supervision of Sing Sing Prison for Men. During most of the 20th century, women were imprisoned exclusively in women's prisons. Currently, the population of women's prisons resemble that in prisons for men. The last bullet point I have for this chapter, this part of the chapter, is privatization of corrections. In the current era of free enterprise, state monopolies in many areas of government are gradually giving away to private enterprises, such as making clothes giving prisoners small profit to make bigger profits for clothing companies. Turning over the administration of prisons to private entrepreneurs who expect to run prisons at a profit. The first private enterprise prison was established in 1975 when RCA was under contract with Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, opened a training school for delinquents in Breoville. Sovereign right of the people as represented by their government to punish those found guilty of violating the People's Code should ever be transferred to private hands. And that wraps up my outline of correctional offers, privatizing of corrections. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Agnesa Yaranian and I'm going to talk about Chapter 18, Community Alternatives, and the main points will be probation, parole, and the search for cost-beneficial alternatives. First, I'll start off with a statement that the public equates punishment and corrections with prisons and jails, and incarceration is the worst punishment for prisons and jails. Incarceration is not as significant as non-institutional control of offenders because of probation, parole, and other alternatives to confinement. John Augustus often visited the courts and stepped forward to pay fines himself for the petty criminals who were in jail. His method was to bail the offenders after they were convicted and help them get a job to support their family. After he would do that, he would take the defendant to courts to prove the judge that the judge should fine the convict 1 cent and costs instead of taking him to an institution. John Augustus was the one who created the concept of probation because of his approach. The purpose of probation is to help offenders get involved in society under supervision. Again, probation is important because it helps the community stay protected. Now, parole. The concept of parole was introduced about the same time as that of probation. Parole is the supervised release of a prisoner before expiration of the prison sentence, and it can appear to be similar to probation. The idea of parole was introduced in the United States at the first National Prison Association Congress in 1870. Parole success rates have never been great. Perhaps parole is granted too late. The high failure rate is not the only reason parole has come under attack in recent years. First, parole is supposed to be a reward for rehabilitation in prison, yet prisons don't promote rehabilitation. Second, the parole system has long been plagued by a lack of valid criteria that parole boards can use when they decide whether to release a prisoner. The search for cost-beneficial alternatives. Probation and parole have always been regarded as cost-beneficial alternatives to imprisonment. The search has begun for cost-beneficial alternatives consistent with the public's demand for security and the punitive philosophy that marks the current era. Intensive supervision appears to be effective and cost-beneficial for offenders who are eligible for parole but who might pose undue risks and are therefore denied release on routine parole. In such cases, release into an intensive supervision parole program structured along the same lines as front-end programs frees prisons, bed space, and provides the same financial rewards to the community as front-end programs. And that was it.
Hi, my name is Charity. Today I'll be talking to you guys about SHOCK programs and the evaluation of community alternatives. To begin, in the SHOCK program section on page 499, it goes over retribution theory as well as the just desert theory. And it discusses punishment and how it's measured. In one way, it can be measured by the length of time to be spent in confinement, which is a period determined by the gravity of the offense and the guilt of the culpability of the perpetrator. At the same time, it also mentioned that punishment should also be measured by the punitiveness and the severity of the incarceration. So keeping those two factors in mind when measuring who should be punished and how they should be punished and how long and what are the effects and things of that sort. And secondly, the book mentions shock incarceration, also known as SI, which is a way that it attempts to shock offenders out of criminal behavior by subjecting them to short periods, which is like 90 to 180 days, of intense drills, hard work, and character building exercises. So what they do is they break it down to less days, and then it's more intense work in a shorter period of time. That was supposed to be effective. Next, it talked a little bit about boot camp programs and how they're politically attractive, being that they're cost effective at the same time, and demonstrates to the public that the defenders are actually getting the discipline that is deserved or that is necessary. This is mostly used for young male offenders under the age of 30. More than double between 1990 and 2001, increasing from 22 facilities to 52 facilities. Boot camp in fact, had little effect on reducing recidivism. So although it was set up for low risk crimes and offenders of that kind to go in fast, hard work, train. A lot of the times it wasn't effective, and a lot of these offenders ended up back into the system. So next, it brought up restitution programs, and it discussed how they've become increasingly popular since 1973, when a team of American correctional specialists visited a prison in Frankfurt, Germany that had been converted into an employment detention center. So basically what they did is they took this prison and then they put low-risk inmates in this prison with low security and turn it into an employment detention center where, in fact, these guys actually worked and was able to pay a lot of costs off, such as, well, in fact, they were obligated to work every day, and wages were budgeted by correctional staff to pay court costs, confinement costs, victim restitution. They had the opportunity to send support of their families and transportation to work, and etc. The walkout rate was low. It mentioned that it was low. And those who tried to walk out were placed in a secure prison. So a lot of it was just work. So making these inmates feel like they're still in the community. They're still part of the community. In some ways of being able to have a routine and get up and work and go sleep and send money to your family was actually beneficial for them. In some ways, but it was not effective as far as recidivism. Next, it was the employment prisons, and that was also known as what I also mentioned in the beginning was the low security restitution centers. They were mainly low risk offenders, and were located near cities where a lot of these people lived and worked initially. And at night they had to remain within the facility, and but during working hours they were able to actually pursue employment and work throughout the day, and then be confined at night within the facility. Victims and public support restitution programs, and the reason why is because they feel like these offenders are getting what they deserve, while at the same time in a safe manner that the community won't be harmed or won't be at risk or anything of that sort. So next, was the straight fines, the day fines, and the community service. So straight fines were described as a fixed sum and can be a burden to a factory worker, but no burden to a manager. So it also mentioned that Nordic countries, like Sweden, utilized the day fine system. And day fine was actually described as the amount of the fine is measured in the days of earnings. And in this section, it actually mentions how this helps public treasury. All of these offenders that are on lockdown, that are subjected to working and getting paid for it, or being able to still support their family in the small amounts that they did get paid for, it also helped the public treasury. Offenders were in the community and were not subjected to prisonization. And lastly, it talked about community service. Community service, it mentions the first jurisdiction in the United States to use community service orders was Alameda County in California in 1966. And in this way, it made people feel like they were still in the community. They still are part of the community. You're doing your duties, you're serving your time, you're making up for the wrong that you did by giving back. And a lot of these people gave back and helped in medical centers, and actually became very close to those that they work with. And it just had a lot of constructive activities, and a lot of them went through undergo a change of attitudes, which is positive. So that is my section. And again, that was shock programs, page 499 if you want to check that out, an evaluation of community alternatives. Thank you.